Hi guys, this is my second video on that 401k thing. Remember the first one, I gave a general idea about 401k. We restrict ourselves, only for what uh, Warren Buffett recommends, so things become so much simpler. But I showed you that although everybody says it's the best investment, there is a risk, and we should be aware of this risk. And in this second video, I'm going to talk about portfolio and risk management. Well, if we follow Warren Buffett, the portfolio things becomes very, very simple because if you remember the old ways that people would try to allocate their 401k money, the advisors would say that you should put so much percent in stock, so much percent in bonds. Like one of the famous rules of thumb was that when you get to for 40 years old, you should use your age as a percentage that goes on bonds, and the remainder goes in stock. Like for 40 years old, 40% on bonds, 60% in stock. 50 years old, 50% in each. 60 years old, then you're going to have only 40% in stock and the rest in bonds and so on. So now, with Warren Buffett, when you talk about stocks, we're talking about the index S&P 500, period. And when you talk about bonds, let's restrict ourselves to the Treasury bill, T-bills, which is safe. It gives a very, very safe, very predictable, gives you very little return, but you know, but that's what they are for. So basically, what we're going to talk is the risk management and how to allocate our money into the S&P and T-bills. So one thing that I have a problem with, first you have those rules of thumb, and also like even in our program in our 401k, you see that they have those special funds or special portfolios if you plan to retire in 10 years, in 20 years or whatever, 5 years. This is very misleading. I would not go with that because what happens is that how you have to build your portfolio has to do not with the time that you are going to have until you retire. It has to do with so many other factors that are special for your case. And basically, what you end up doing, you will end up doing two things wrong, two wrong things. First, sometimes you will be overly safe. So you will make things in a way that you should be much more, much more aggressive. You'll be making less. So you're putting your risk much lower than your actual risk um, tolerance, and also the opposite, depending on what you do. So there are many people I know that many people among us that they get all their money, all their 401k, and just put in the index. They may be overly risky depending on their plans. So we should have a little bit understanding on how to allocate our money based on our risk condition. And the ones among us, the ones that went to that, to took those classes on project management, you remember that one of the sections of the class, on about 3 or 4 classes, was just on risk management. I mean, it is a science in itself. It is not an exact science because it blends a lot of mathematical and statistical concepts with your common sense and with a lot of assumptions that you do based on your horse sense or your experience. The same thing in finance. But it's very difficult. You have to come up with a risk assessment that you feel comfortable with, and you have to keep reviewing it because as time goes by, your risk assessment should change. So you have to keep reviewing it and etc. And if you do it the right way, for example, remember that on the emails that I sent, I showed you that this year, the last year, I finished the year with a return of 60%. And I tell you guys, I'm not gambling. I'm not being reckless. I mean, I have what takes most of my time is my risk management. Try to understand exactly what I'm at, and I'll try to understand if the worst of the worst happens, what's gonna happen with me, and also also having an idea of what is the probability, that the real bad situations, how likely they are to happen, and in case what happens, what type of mitigation, what type of contingency that I can use and everything. In other words, many of you could be making much more than what you're making in 401ks if you knew what is your risk tolerance and if you played with it. This is very important. Let me put it this way: if you're really serious in determining your risk, you should do everything you can to optimize returns up to your risk. In other words, if you determine a certain level for your risk, and then you say, no, I will just operate in a level much lower than my risk tolerance, is because you don't trust in your risk assessment. Because if you really trusted the risk assessment that you came up with, you have no problem, bringing your investment. I mean, the the returns of your investment, your called the aggressiveness up to where your risk is. All right. So as I said, let me tell you one detail, and then I'm going to go back to another comment on risk. Uh, Many people among us, regardless of our age, I tell you that if you make a very reasonable risk assessment, you will find out that your portfolio, okay, like if you have a certain age a certain age and a certain risk situation, you should have suppose 80% of your money in the S&P. Now, for another condition, you should have 90% of your money in the S&P. And for another condition, you should have 100% of your money in the S&P. But then you find, especially if you're young, if you're 30 years old and you're planning to retire when you're 65, you'll find that, putting 100% of your money in the S&P is not enough because you can't tolerate more risk than that. So why don't you put 110% of your money in the S&P? Or how about 120% or 130%, 200% of your money in the S&P? So you're going to say, oh, you're crazy. Of course, the bank is not let me do or is not allow me to do that. Well, maybe you're about 20 years outdated, because today in our system, in our 401k, you can put up to 30% of your balance. I'm sorry, the 30%. You can put 300% of your balance in the S&P. So how can this be? How is this possible? You can imagine, how is this possible? If I only have $100,000, how can I have $300,000 in the S&P? Well, this is what they call leverage. Okay, in the past, leverage was only available to the big banks or to the big finance companies or the big, and you have all those. You might have heard about those. There are horror stories, right? Like in other words, this is called a derivative investment. And you have those terrible, because when I say that you're, you know, suppose that you have 100,000 in your account and you are investing 300,000. I mean, you're using a leverage of 3. If the index goes up 1%, your balance is gonna go up 3%. But the opposite is also true. If the index goes down 1%, your balance is gonna go down what? 3%. So you must know very much what you're doing. So like basically you have to, yeah, okay, I made my risk assessment and I feel comfortable and I'm within my risk tolerance, even if I have $100,000 in my 401k, I can go up to $200,000 in the 401k that I can still stand a possible drawdown. Okay, so this is something that what I want to say is that if you're putting 100% of a 401k in the index, I bet you money that you're not doing the right thing, because it's very unlikely that your personal risk condition fits exactly 100%. Either you're being, you're being overcautious or you're being undercautious. It's very unlikely that after a very truthful and very careful risk analysis, you find out that you should be doing exactly, putting exactly 100% of your money in the 401k. Now, you will come up with something less, depending on your situation, less, like 90%. You'll come up with something more, especially as I said, in certain conditions, you're gonna come up with, and in my case, when if I had 60% in a year, it means that I'm leveraging it. Once I told this to my daughter, explained that I'm using leveraging, I said, no, don't do this. This is so dangerous. No, don't do that. I heard that, so many people, they lost everything. Of course, I didn't disagree with her, but that's why you have to know exactly what you're doing. You have to know exactly where your risk stands, and then you'll be able to make much more money. Now, let me talk about something, as I said, some details. Number one, as I said, those special funds that I say, okay, if you're gonna retire in 10 years, you do this. If you're gonna retire in 20 years, you do this. Don't forget about those things. Uh, and any other rules of thumb for you to determine what to do, forget about those things. Let me tell you one thing. When they come up with those, it is very, very broad generalization. And basically what I heard, what I read is that those type of things they get, for a professional person. They got a typical professional person in the Midwest of this country. Now, let's think about the differences that we have in the Silicon Valley and a guy like I used to live in Western Michigan. And if you make your personal risk assessment, the number one thing, typically a person in the West Michigan, normally when he goes to retire, his home equity is less than 20% of what's going to be our home equity when we retire in this area. Can you think about that? In other words, in your retirement living here, when you retire, you're going to have your equity. It's going to be maybe 40% 401k, 60% your house. While a guy in Michigan is going to have, when he retires, he's going to have maybe 80% of 401k, 20% his house. Okay, because you know that we pay a lot. If we buy a house here, we pay a lot of money. Well, this point indicates that we in this area if we have a house and if we plan to build up equity in it, I mean, I'm not trying to predict the future, okay? So it's your obligation when you make your risk assessment. It's your obligation to determine and to assess because we had the subprime crisis, and nobody can guarantee that something similar will never happen again. I don't believe it will ever happen again, but nobody can guarantee. In any case, if you get to the conclusion that when you go to retire, you're going to have a lot of equity in your house, very in relation to your 401k. And besides, what happens with most of us in this area, and I have been talking to many people, when you go, if you compare with other areas, is that there's a lot of people that when they retire in Silicon Valley, they don't stay here, which is different from Michigan. And in Michigan, you have this house, you pay that off, and you're retired, and you're going to stay there. Some of them, they buy a timeshare in Florida. Some of them, they become kind of snowbirds, but they stick to the place where they are. Most of us here, when we retire, we don't stay here unless, you were born and raised in San Jose and that you have your family around. Most of us, we are going to sell our house here and you're going to buy a house somewhere else and you're going to have a much more cash in our hands, hopefully. What I'm saying is that in general, I mean, as a trend, if you're a professional in the Valley, you should be much, much, much more aggressive with your 401k than a person in other places. Because the percentage that the 401k has in your whole retirement is less because you're building a lot of equity, much more than a Michigander in your house. Okay, this is the first point. The second point, like I'm saying, is that you're building this equity in your house, and very likely you're going to move away. So this equity will become cash, and you'll be able to buy a house better than the one that you have now, if depending on where you're going to, for maybe, I don't know, 25%. So if what I'm saying is that let's assume that you're more aggressive with your 401k, and let's assume that everything goes bad, and and then your expectations are not met in 401k, but they are within your risk tolerance because you took into account. Then you see that your loss is going to be much less than a person who doesn't have a house in a place like that. All right. So these are the 2 points that I would like to bring up. Number one, you have to play with an assessment. What if, a what if game. I know it's not fun. Okay, it's not fun for you to. What if this happens and if it does not happen, and then you have to consider bad things. If an accident happens, if a very bad accident happens, what's going to happen? I know you're going to have to build those suppositions. What if here? What if there? What if there? And then I believe that here some people they go through, the system FM. My goodness, I used to do this a lot in my other job. F FM FMC FMRC. Oh, the assessment of a process. When you start a process, that you see what can go wrong, the probabilities that it can go wrong, and etc. F FM FMRC or something. And we have to do this for your personal life. To list everything that can happen and how bad it is, each one of those events, and also how likely is each one of those events to um, to happen. So, and then you'll be able to see that. And then you have to be reasonable. Like in my case, just as an example, I have this very much figured out because I've been working on this a lot of time and all the time trying to correct. And I put, okay, in my case, it's very special. Why is it special? Because on top of all the things all the particularities that we have in the valley, it's very likely because I am from Brazil and my wife lived most of her life in France. So it's very likely that we won't stay in the States as retirees. Very likely we may go to France as an option, or somewhere else in Italy, in Europe. So and you can find places, very delightful places in which you spend you spend maybe 20% of what you would spend in some places in the state. So it gives me even more leverage. It gives even more, I can be even more aggressive than other people. Okay. And this is why, as I said, when I created my portfolio, when I created the approach that I have been using, I could go up. I would say that this year, of course, was an exception. I got to 60%. I know that this will never happen again, and I'm going to explain about this later. So, what I want to say for this segment is basically this: that you have to develop, and you have a lot of guides like if you took the project management class, go back to the books that they gave you on risk assessment. You can also find in internet, you find many sources of how to assess risk for your personal finance. And like if you have this FMEA, I think it's FMEA, yeah, the FMEA. If you had some experience on this, you can use the same template to make the assessment of your personal risk. And this is one thing. Now, as I said, it's very likely that if you do it in a very reasonable way, you will fit like I am in the percentile that I need more than 100% of my money in the S&P. Okay. So, and then we're gonna see in our system how we can do this. What are the ETFs? Because of course you only have so much money in your fund, so that's why you can invest. But when you go and you invest in an ETF, which is times 2 or times 3, that's basically what you're doing. You're investing 3 times your balance into the index. Okay, and I tell you, many of us, even old, I'm 62 years old. If even older people, they may get to the conclusion that they can withstand enough risk to go above the 100% in the index. So that's the second point. The next video, I'm going to talk about how to actually do the thing. How the things can be done and what you have currently in the market. Like I said, once Warren Buffett, he said, well, the whole thing's a hoax. So nowadays, there are other types of products which actually they may also be a hoax. That's the problem. They may also be a hoax. But there's a lot of other suggestions on how to use your money to get more than just S&P. Okay. So yeah, so let's think a little bit about this. What is for each one of us, what is my personal risk tolerance, and see, where we stand in terms of the, the balance between bonds and stocks, and also to check if we are not, if we don't stand above 100% in stocks, which may be the case for many of us. Okay, so yeah, that's for this. This is for today, and then we can. I'm gonna have one or two more videos just to wrap it up. Thank you. Bye bye.